The scene began with a man sitting deep within a cave, both of his arms torn off. Before him stood two men. The furious one stepped forward, ready to strike, but his companion, keeping a cool head, stopped him. He told him to wait and called for their allies, referring to the wounded man before them as the Pantheon of the North. Then, he asked man about the relic the Emperor wanted, questioning what he even intended to do with it. The guy then scoffed, saying this was the reason they had been forced to suffer for days in the freezing wilderness, searching for him. But RMC said nothing, looking like he didn't even appear to care about what was being said. Finally, the two men decided they would beat him for what he had done. They agreed to toss a coin to see who would go first. But before the coin even landed, RMC, eyes burning with determination, declared that no one would trample on him. He lifted one of his severed arms and reattached it. He remembered the day he failed to awaken his aura, a moment that defined him as a failure among knights. Tossed aside like garbage, called useless, he had clawed his way through pain and humiliation just to survive. Now, all his energy was focused on one thing: survival. As the coin landed, one of the men laughed, claiming victory. But his happiness lasted only a heartbeat before his head was sliced clean from his body. The other man froze in shock. MC turned to him next, and with a single, swift strike, he cut him down and reattached his other arm. When the other recruits arrived and seeing the sight of him, whispering in disgust, calling him a freak, and irregular, he ignored them, exhaled sharply, and prepared for battle once again. Moments later, the bodies of his enemies lay scattered across the ground, lifeless. MC, bloodied and covered in wounds, knelt down, coughing violently. Knives were still embedded in his back. He muttered that this was his end. He knew he would not make it out alive, but even as death crept in, he found peace in knowing that at least the Emperor would never lay hands on the relic. Holding it tightly, he whispered an apology to someone named Alicia. At that moment, the relic began to glow. A system notification appeared before him, declaring that the spirit of the Elder Dragon shall be etched upon the soul of the one with the will. A looming figure appeared behind him, chanting a spell. Then, the system addressed him directly, calling him Zeke Draker, and asked for permission to proceed. Half delirious, believing it was a death hallucination, Zeke muttered that he didn't care, that the system could do whatever it wanted. The system accepted his command and initiated what it called an irreversible promise. It began counting down from 5 to 1. Then everything went dark. In his younger body, the pain and the cold of his death still lingering. He laid on the bed, realizing he was in a familiar place, the cradle, the House Draker's training institution. He remembered, the House Draker was one of the 3 transcended houses, founded by Drakon Draker, the dragon slayer who had saved the continent 1,000 years ago by defeating the evil dragon, Bahamut. Those who carried Drakon's bloodline inherited his gift, the ability to awaken aura easily and become knights blessed by the kingdom. Suddenly, the system appeared, saying it was rebooting. He jolted, startled, wondering if he is hearing things. Then, another message appeared confirming a 100% match. The system declared that the Elder Dragon's spirit would now fully merge with his soul. The system greeted him, then activated something called Status Window View. Countless notifications appeared, classes, skills, stats, all unfamiliar terms to him. He reached out, surprised to find that his hand passed through the projection. Looking closer, he recognized the ancient classifications his master once spoke of. His master had told him that in the old days people were ranked by class, and each class possessed unique, specialized skills. That was why he could use heal, because he had been a healer class. Zeke's expression darkened as he remembered those brutal training sessions, how his master had pushed him to the brink of death after his awakening. Then, forcing himself to calm down, he began to test the system. His eyes widened as it worked. He realized that though his hard-earned body from the previous life was gone, he still had his memories, knowledge, and experience. With those alone, he already had an overwhelming advantage. Just as he began planning his next move, there came a knock on the door. He jumped, startled. A voice called out, telling him to stop pretending that he wasn't inside. Panicked, Zeke scrambled to hide the glowing system window. The door opened, and in stepped a stern-looking man, Decker, his personal assistant. Decker scolded him immediately, asking if he was ready and what on earth he was thinking. Zeke tried to play it cool, answering while frantically trying to dismiss the system. When he realized Decker couldn't see it, he concluded that the system was invisible to others. Decker's tone turned sharp as he continued to lecture him. Zeke remembered how terrified he used to be of this man as a child. Even though he was 32 now, that fear was still there. Then, without warning, the system activated a skill called Tranquil Mind. His anxiety faded, replaced by calm focus. He sat back, glancing at the floating interface, now more fascinated than frightened. Decker continued, reminding him that this was an important day and he needed to be ready. Seeing Zeke lost in thought, Decker demanded if he was even listening. Zeke nodded quietly, remembering a year ago, the day of the Pancration, the annual evaluation of the House Draker's students, when he was beaten nearly to death. Zeke narrated that every child born into the Draker bloodline entered a training institution known as the Cradle at the age of 7. There, they underwent 5 years of rigorous basic training. Each year, their progress was tested in a brutal event called the Pancration, a fight without rules, a mix of swordsmanship and bare-handed combat. The opponents were usually chosen by the instructors, but students could also challenge one another directly, as long as both parties agreed. Since there were no restrictions, injuries and even deaths were common. But that was the way of the Cradle. A student's performance in the Pancration determined their class ranking, and every trainee had to give their all if they hoped to reach the top. Then the scene shifted to the day of that very event. The sun glared down on the training grounds as the students stood in formation. The instructor, a stern man named Pan Mark, addressed them with sharp precision. He reminded them that this was their final evaluation, the Pancration, and ordered them to prepare. As the students stood, whispers spread through the crowd. Many were murmuring about Zeke. They were surprised he had even returned after what had happened to him the previous year. Some mocked him, not even caring if he could hear them. Instructor Pan Mark raised his arm, signaling the start of the matches. One student lunged recklessly at his opponent, only to be countered with a brutal uppercut to the jaw. Watching from the sidelines, Zeke thought to himself that he had once been terrified of the Pancration. But now, after everything he had been through, these fights looked almost childish to him. He yawned, visibly bored. Someone in the crowd, a boy with a smug grin staring directly at him. The instructor called their names, announcing their turn. As Zeke walked toward the arena, he rubbed his eyes lazily and muttered that he had to fight Leon again this year. Leon scoffed as they faced each other. With a sneer, he told Zeke that he hadn't gotten enough attention last year and that if he wanted to live this time, he'd better beg for mercy. Zeke said nothing, but in his mind, he recalled that humiliating day, the day he had actually begged Leon to stop beating him. He frowned. Something about this always felt off. Leon had been his opponent every year, and every year, the outcome was the same: he lost. The Draker family must have turned a blind eye, he thought, believing that a true dragon slayer should know how to endure underhanded schemes. Still, he couldn't believe that this arrogant scumbag was his own cousin, one of the many who had bullied him endlessly. Out of his 10 cousins and 4 siblings, he had never found a single person worth trusting. Leon smirked again, taunting him. He laughed, saying that Zeke must be either defective or a painfully slow learner for coming back after being beaten year after year. At that moment, the system within Zeke activated Tranquil Mind. His emotions cooled instantly. He looked at Leon with a blank expression and said quietly that it had been a long time since someone called him a defect. Then, meeting his cousin's gaze, he told him he would make him regret those words. Leon laughed and walked closer, gripping Zeke's hair roughly. He asked mockingly what Zeke planned to do about it, but before he could finish his sentence, Zeke's fist connected with his face. The system triggered fatal blow, amplifying the strike into a critical hit. Leon flew backward. Zeke blinked, momentarily impressed that the system had activated on its own. Instructor Pan Mark shouted furiously, demanding how Zeke could hit his opponent before the official start. But Zeke replied coolly, saying that no one on the battlefield ever waited for someone to say, "Fight," before striking. Then, with a cold grin and eyes sharp as blades, he added, "The one who stabs first is the one who lives." For a brief moment, the instructor froze. He could have sworn he sensed bloodlust coming from the boy. Leon wiped the blood from his mouth and told the instructor it was fine. He smirked, saying he couldn't wait to kill Zeke once the match began. The instructor hesitated, then gave the signal. Leon charged forward. The system reactivated fatal blow as Zeke moved. His punch landed squarely again, staggering Leon. But Leon recovered quickly, convinced that Zeke's punches were weak, not like the first one. He raised his arms, blocking most of the strikes and waiting for an opening. Zeke attempted a left counter, but Leon dodged and grabbed his leg, trying to throw him down. At the last second, Zeke's knee shot upward, slamming into Leon's jaw. The impact made the instructor widen his eyes. A move like that from a 12-year-old? Impossible. He began to wonder if this was even the same Zeke Draker he once knew. Leon stumbled back, dazed. His body screamed in pain. He could barely move. Seizing the chance, Zeke kicked him hard in the knees. Leon tried to strike back, swinging wildly, but the system suddenly activated heightened senses. In an instant, he dodged each attack effortlessly, moving with precision. Then, grabbing Leon's arm, Zeke muttered that it was time to end it. He slammed Leon onto the ground with a bone-crunching thud. The system triggered Vital Strike, amplifying the blow as Zeke rained down fists on his opponent, breaking ribs with each hit. Then, he struck again. And again. The other students froze. The instructor stood speechless, horrified. When it was over, Leon lay unconscious on the floor, broken and bloodied. Zeke stood over him, breathing steadily. Then he looked down at his cousin and said coldly that this was what he got for calling him a defect. Brushing his hair back casually, Zeke sighed, saying he felt much clearer after a bit of exercise. Then, turning toward the stunned crowd, he told them all to stop avoiding eye contact, and if anyone had something to say, they should say it to his face. One of the students then stepped forward, calling out Zeke's name. He declared that he was choosing Zeke as his opponent and added, with a smirk, that he had something to tell him, just as he said. Zeke looked at him with an expression of absolute seriousness. Then, in a calm tone, he told the boy that fighting him alone would be boring. He turned toward the boy's assistant and called him out as well, saying that both of them should fight together. With a light snicker, he added that this way, the match might at least be fair. The boy frowned and asked if that was supposed to be an insult. Zeke beamed as he told him that he was quick to catch on it, making the boy's irritation spike further. Inside, he swore that he was going to kill Zeke. They both made their way down to the arena. The instructor, clearly remembering Zeke's last stunt, warned him not to start fighting before the signal this time. Zeke nodded casually, agreeing without much concern. As they stood facing each other, Zeke observed the assistant, Liam. He remembered him. In his past life, Liam had become the mercenary king. He recalled that Liam had entered the cradle as the assistant to this same arrogant student. Though he was distantly related to the Draker family, his lineage was weak, and eventually, the family abandoned him. Liam had begged to stay, pleaded to be trained, but he was expelled and left with nothing. Afterward, Liam joined the Order of Knights in a small nation called Varanen. That kingdom later fell to the Empire, and with nowhere else to go, Liam became a mercenary. Through chaos and blood he rose. The strong naturally drew others to them, and soon, Liam had founded the Stone Mercenary Corps, a formidable company that would one day make him one of the 3 great mercenary lords on the continent. Zeke remembered fighting him years later, as an enemy, when the Emperor had hired the Stone Corps to wage war across the continent. But now, things could be different. The instructor raised his hand and says fight. Immediately, the arrogant boy, whose name I couldn't even bother to remember, charged forward, throwing a punch. To his shock, Zeke caught his fist effortlessly. With a cold expression, Zeke told him that he had said they should team up against him, not come at him alone. The boy tried again, lashing out with a kick. The kick landed awkwardly, and the boy stumbled back, clutching his leg in pain. Zeke tilted his head and told him sarcastically that he should probably watch where he kicks. The arrogant student looked down in disbelief at his injured leg. Zeke didn't give him time to recover. He charged forward and asked mockingly what he was staring at. As he neared him, Zeke feinted a punch, making arrogant guy cover his face, and then suddenly kicked him in the knees. Before the boy could even react, Zeke jabbed him hard in the side and remarked that this was exactly why he told him to team up. Fighting him alone was nothing short of pathetic. The boy, humiliated and in pain, yelled for his assistant to take over. Liam stepped forward. Standing tall, Zeke took note of his build, far too developed for someone their age. He thought that the greatest challenge in fighting Liam would be his long reach and overwhelming strength. He knew that if he allowed Liam to take control of the fight, he would lose. As the two faced off, Zeke's instincts sharpened. The system suddenly activated butchery. His body moved faster, disrupting Liam's line of sight. Gasps filled the arena as the students watched in disbelief. Even instructor Pan Mark muttered that none of the students had ever seen such a fighting style before. It was true, this was the Northern boxing technique. The instructor wondered silently how Zeke could possibly know it. Zeke's movements were swift and relentless, but his body was already growing tired. He could feel his stamina fading. He sighed in frustration at the circumstance. Meanwhile, Liam fought defensively, using his sheer size to block each hit. He simply absorbed the blows like a wall of flesh and muscle. Zeke thought that Liam's greatest weakness, for now, was his lack of aggression, a flaw that would vanish in the man he would one day become. Realizing he had reached his limit, Zeke decided to end it. He drew in his last reserves of strength and charged forward for one final blow. He aimed straight for Liam's chest, but this time, Liam dodged. Then, Liam grabbed Zeke's arm mid-strike and tried to slam him into the ground. But before he could complete the motion, Zeke moved behind Liam and locked his arm around the boy's neck, dragging him into a chokehold. Liam struggled violently, managing to land a punch against Zeke, but his resistance began to fade and finally, Liam's body went limp. Zeke released him, letting him fall gently to the ground. His chest rose and fell with exhaustion. From the stands, a girl suspiciously smirked, saying that just makes it all the more satisfying when she beats him, referring to our boy. The scene opened in Zeke's room. Decker, his assistant, stood with a look of concern and asked if Zeke was all right. He said he had heard that Zeke suffered serious injuries during the pancration. Dracker then politely asked for permission to take his pulse. Zeke, in his thoughts, noted that Decker was probably trying to check if his aura had awakened. He sighed but offered his hand anyway. The moment Decker's fingers touched his wrist, our boy felt aura flow throughout his body. Zeke knew that Decker was an Azura Knight, someone capable of channeling their aura precisely enough to detect another's. Only those of that level could control their energy with such delicate precision. He then narrates that there were many classes of knights, ranked by their mastery of aura. The Ivory Warrior was the beginner stage, when one first wielded a sword. Most students at the cradle remained in this stage until the blessing ceremony, where they awakened their aura and became Amber Warriors. With training, they could refine their aura and eventually ascend to the Amethyst Knight, who could infuse a blade with pure aura. Above them stood the Azura Knights, who could project their aura as blades. And beyond even them were the Crimson Knights, those who had transcended mortal limits, like Liam, the Mercenary King, and Zeke himself in his past life. Few ever surpassed that stage. Only a handful of Obsidian Knights were known across the entire continent. Zeke studied Decker in silence, thinking that this man clearly fit the level of an Azura Knight. He wondered then, why someone of that caliber was acting as a nanny for a 12-year-old boy. As Decker continued the examination, Zeke reminded himself that aura could not detect ether. He was safe, for now. Decker eventually released his hand, his expression darkening, and asked whether Zeke was hiding something. Zeke, unfazed, replied calmly, asking Decker why he was even asking that, and added that perhaps Decker was the one hiding something. The room fell silent for a few tense seconds before Zeke broke it with a small chuckle, telling him he was only joking. Zeke halted as Decker asked why Zeke had suddenly changed so drastically, why he seemed like a completely different person. Zeke met his gaze and told him he was asking the wrong question. He should be asking why it had taken him this long to change. He then added that more changes were coming. Decker fell silent, bowed respectfully, and informed him that the training room he requested had been prepared. Zeke dismissed him, telling him to rest. On his way, he wondered who Decker truly worked for. His mother? Impossible, she had long since passed away. Perhaps one of his siblings on his father's side. Zeke then entered the training room. He then thinks that this is one of the few advantages of being born into a Drakkar noble house. Using this opportunity, he opened the system and checked his stats. His skill butchery had risen from beginner to expert. He realized the skill improved through repeated use, automatically activating based on circumstance. He theorized that perhaps these were skills he already possessed in his past life, and that new ones might appear as he relearned them. He studied the skill menu again, wondering what the difference between class skills and regular skills. He then sees Draconian skills, requiring 10 points to unlock. Below that, he found karma points, which were gained by killing monsters. He thought dungeons would be the best source for those, but that would require reaching the level of an Amethyst Knight at least. Still, one thought consumed him: why had he regressed? And what was this system that bound him? He remembered the ancient relic the Emperor had sought and began to suspect that it was connected to both the system and his regression. Gripping his sword, he stood tall and whispered to himself that whether it was the House Drakkar or the system, he would use them both to become stronger. We then see that there are two types of power in the world: aura, used by knights, and mana, wielded by mages. Aura flowed through energy centers, while mana was controlled through magical circles. The two were polar opposites. Awakening one meant losing access to the other. Unfortunately, Zeke had been born with the worst possible fate, unable to open either. Disowned and wandering the streets, he had eventually met his master, the man who taught him everything, from survival to ether hole. His master had created a technique known as the ether hole, allowing the user to draw from the pure energy of nature itself. Only two people in the world could wield it, him and his master. After 2 hours of intense training, Zeke collapsed to the floor, trembling and exhausted. Just as he was about to black out, the system automatically activated class heal and stamina recovery, restoring his strength and sealing his wounds. He remembered that the healer class was incredibly rare, so rare, in fact, that if he uses it in front of everyone, he would be accused of being an irregular. That was why he hadn't used healing during his fight with Liam. The first thing he did after returning to his room had been to secretly heal himself. Now, fully recovered, he pushed forward, continuing his training for hours more until he once again dropped to the floor, breathing heavily. As his eyes grew heavy, he wondered what excuse he would give Decker later. 1 week later, the Cradle cafeteria buzzed with chatter. Several students gossiped about Zeke Drakkar, claiming he had become a completely different person overnight. One of them called him a loser, another joked that maybe he had used black magic. Their laughter faded as we shift toward a table where the academy's elite students sat. Owen, one of the students sitting, urged the others to eat, saying that sword practice on an empty stomach was pointless. One of the other boys scoffed, telling Owen not to order him around. Owen replied that the boy should stop twisting friendly advice into insults. Perhaps it was his inferiority complex talking. The boy shot up from his seat, furious, demanding that Owen repeat himself. Amid the commotion, a piece of food fell from the plate of a girl sitting nearby. Irritated, she looked up annoyed at them. The other dude asked what they were planning to do about Zeke, making Owen's lips curled into a sinister grin. He told them that when the sword duel came, they'd take the chance to put Zeke in his place, confident that the boy couldn't even use a sword properly. The hot-headed boy joined in, scoffing that Zeke was so weak he had ordered a custom sword, calling it pathetic and claiming that his victory in the Pancration was just a fluke. He mocked him as a defective loser who never learns. The girl beside them suddenly stood, her voice sharp and commanding. She told the arrogant boy that if he thought Zeke's win was a fluke, he should fight him again and prove it. And if he couldn't even do that, then he wasn't worthy of calling himself a Drakkar Knight. The scene then shifted to the dueling grounds, where the instructor called Zeke Drakkar's name. Zeke steps onto the stage, holding an enormous claymore, earning him murmurs of disbelief from the other students. The opponent, the girl from before, Reyna Turin, stepped forward and challenged him to a duel. Zeke accepted her challenge without hesitation, lifting his sword and pointing it at her. Reyna thinks that he handled that massive blade. It was effortless, almost casual. She thought to herself that this wasn't the Zeke she knew. The Zeke she remembered could barely hold a sword, let alone swing one like that. For the first time, she found him intimidating. Then she shook her head, scolding herself for even thinking that. She couldn't allow her opponent to unsettle her before the fight had even begun. She reminded herself that this was just another sword fight, one of the many she had fought before. She would be fine. Zeke, meanwhile, kept his expression calm, though his thoughts were far from it. He recognized her name, Reyna Turin, the Flash Knight, a 5-star warrior who had fought in the Continental War in his past life. He couldn't help but feel nervous. She had awakened her aura even before the blessing ceremony and was once considered the most promising prodigy among the next generation of Drakers. Though she had long since awakened her aura, she had chosen not to rely on it, instead dedicating herself to mastering her fundamentals. Then, the instructor gave the signal. Reyna charged. Her blade cut through the air, but Zeke dodged and blocked her attack with swift precision. She spun and attacked again from behind, and again he met her strike perfectly, sliding backward from the impact. He admitted silently that she was better than he expected. From the audience, a voice shouted for Reyna to stop holding back and to finish him with a single blow. Zeke smirked faintly. Whoever that was clearly thought she was going easy on him. Reyna pressed harder, thinking of the openings in Zeke's guard. She could see them, but each time she tried to strike, he deflected her blade. It almost felt as though he was mocking her, revealing weaknesses only to close them at the last second. To her, it no longer felt like a duel. It felt like he was training her. She took a few steps back, narrowing her eyes. Zeke, disappointed, thought to himself that if this was the legendary Flash Knight back in her days. Her fundamentals were perfect, too perfect. Her every movement followed a predictable pattern, the kind taught in every textbook of swordsmanship. He decided to break that pattern and crouches down for a strike. Reyna watched his stance shift, and instantly assumed he was preparing to close the gap. She muttered to herself that when it came to speed, she was no beginner. But before she could even finish the thought, Zeke appeared before her. His sword came crashing down with a force that split the ground in two. Reyna barely managed to dodge, stumbling back as dust as shards of stone filled the air. She steadied herself, thinking that as long as she maintained distance, she could still react. But Zeke's next swing forced her back again. This time, debris flew into her face, and a few small rocks struck her eyes, blinding her for a moment. Zeke saw the opening and lunged forward to strike. Reyna reacted purely on instinct, channeling a faint trace of aura into her blade. No one in the audience noticed, but the instructor did. He realized that before Zeke's strike could reach her, Reyna had used a subtle, almost invisible layer of aura to block it. She had vowed never to use aura until her academy training began, yet Zeke had forced her to use it. Then the instructor announces Reyna as the winner. But Zeke approached, telling her that it wasn't over yet, and strikes her with his fist to her neck. She coughed up blood, the impact sending a ripple of shock through the watching students. Gasps filled the arena. Murmurs of outrage followed. Some students shouted that Zeke had disrespected the duel, that such behavior was unworthy of a knight. Zeke stood over, remarking if victory wasn't what mattered, then what did. Reyna, trembling, forced herself to stand again. Zeke watched her closely, wondering if she truly intended to continue. She steadied her sword and admitted aloud that she had lost. She explained that he had only landed that hit because she had let her guard down, but deep down, she knew the truth. If Zeke had been holding a dagger instead of a sword, the fight would have been over. The instructor stepped forward, raising his voice above the noise. He declared that Zeke Dracker was the winner of the duel. The scene opened in a world consumed by flames, where corpses were carried and dumped over a cliff. Inside room nearby, two men sat in stark contrast to the chaos outside. One calmly drank his tea, while the other questioned how he could remain so composed in such turmoil. Ignoring the question, The red-haired man shifted the conversation to Zeke, mentioning that he had heard the boy defeated Reyna in the sword duel. Rising from his seat, he remarked that the blessing ceremony was near and that he might have to return home. His companion, surprised, asked if he truly planned to go in person. The red-haired man simply smiled and said that after hearing of Zeke's recent accomplishment, he had grown curious to see what his youngest brother would become. A month later, on the morning of the ceremony, Zeke wiped sweat from his face after an intense workout, his once slender frame now toned and strong from relentless training. Opening his status window, he noted that his skill quickstep, learned only a month ago during the duel, had already reached the skilled rank. Just then, Decker knocked on his door, reminding him that the carriage to House Draker's ancestral estate would depart in 2 hours. Zeke then set off, thinking about how long it had been since he had last returned home. The Draker family's ancestral estate, known as the Dragon's Lair, was located in the Troy Duchy at the heart of the continent, within the Four Seasons Castle, the birthplace of the first dragon slayer. Then, they all arrived. The instructor called the students to attention, while famous figures from across the continent watched from the stands. Some of them, Zeke suspected, were secret agents sent by his family to observe him. He told himself that if they saw him fail again, they would lose interest and leave him alone. But his thoughts froze when he spotted a familiar face among the guests: Abel Draker, the Lion Blade, the Slaughter Knight, and his older brother. Seeing him stirred deep irritation within Zeke, but he forced himself to remain calm, realizing that this time, Abel's presence was new. In his past life, Abel had never attended the ceremony. Perhaps, his actions were already changing the future. The ceremony began as students stepped up one by one to place their hands into the sacred bowl of water before the statue, the light that emerged revealing their rank and potential. For descendants of House Draker, this ceremony marked their 12th year, the end of the cradle and the beginning of knighthood, where they opened their energy centers to awaken their aura. Most knights achieved this only around the age of 20, making the Draker heirs truly exceptional. Some rare cases even awaken mana interference alongside their aura, their light glowing red to mark them as pure blood awakeners, destined to become crimson or even obsidian knights. When Reyna's turn came, the instructor ordered special gloves for her, as her mana interference was too strong to control unaided. Those who proved themselves purebloods were granted the Draker name, full financial support, and countless privileges. Then came Zeke's turn. The crowd whispered, certain that anyone capable of defeating Reyna would surely awaken as a pureblood. Standing before the statue, Zeke couldn't help but remember his past life, the humiliation of being the first ever to fail the awakening. Back then, the promise of the blessing ceremony had been the only thing that kept him going through the misery of the cradle. But that same hope had led to his ultimate disgrace. This time, though, he was different. He could use both heal and ether, and above all, he possessed the willpower that had once failed him. Taking a deep breath, he placed his hand into the bowl. The statue began to tremble violently before freezing completely in silence. The crowd gasped, confused. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Zeke's heart sank, his hope crumbling. He looked toward Abel, blaming him for making him believe again. Whispers rippled through the crowd, mocking him for failing, just as they had in his previous life. Then, suddenly, a glowing system window appeared before him, announcing a processing error due to missing identification data. Confused, he wondered what information could be missing. Moments later, another message appeared, identifying him as a healer and confirming that the class had already been unlocked. Then came the next message: a rare class has been awakened. A red light erupted from the bull, the mark of a pure blood, before shifting into a brilliant gold. The system declared that his blood of the warrior had awakened, merging with another rare talent. A unique class unlocked, the talent of immortality. That's the end of this video, and if you want more, like and subscribe to this channel. Ciao.